Marjorie Rieu is the woman most people never see, yet nothing about her story is small. For decades, she stood just out of frame while one of the most recognizable figures in music took the spotlight. But when Marjorie finally shared her goodbye message to her husband, it stopped people cold. Not because it was dramatic or loud, but because of what it quietly carried with it. Join us as we uncover the story behind Marjorie Rieu's emotional goodbye message and why it left so many people shaken. A childhood in silence. Maastricht in the early 1950s wasn't just the town where Marjorie's life began. It was the kind of place where people still carried the war in their faces, in their routines, and in what they didn't say out loud. The streets could look normal again, but inside many homes, things were still tense. For Marjorie, that tension wasn't a passing feeling. It was the air in her house. She grew up in a strict German-Dutch household where rules mattered more than comfort. Her father ran the home with discipline, and there was little space for softness. He wasn't strict just because he liked control. He was a Holocaust survivor. He had lived through fear most people can't imagine, and he came out of it believing that one mistake could cost everything. That belief didn't stay in the past. It followed him into family life. It shaped how he talked, how he listened, and how he raised his children. One of the biggest tools he used was language. To him, language wasn't just words. It was safe. It was ordered. It was something you could hold on to when life felt unsafe. So when Marjorie turned 5, her evenings became structured drills. She practiced German again and again. She learned poems and repeated lines until her voice felt tired. It wasn't meant to be fun. It was meant to build control. By the time she was 10, she could switch between German and Dutch smoothly, almost like she had two separate minds for two separate worlds. And that quiet strength was exactly what she would need for what came next. Choosing the violin. When Marjorie was still very young, the plan for her was already written by other people. In a strict home like hers, a proper girl was expected to sit neatly at the piano, practice politely, and follow the rules. The piano wasn't just an instrument, it was a symbol of obedience, good manners, and staying inside the lines. So when Marjorie quietly chose the violin instead, it wasn't a small preference. It was her first clear act of defiance. She didn't announce it. She didn't argue. She simply reached for what she wanted. Even though she knew it would bring trouble, she took the violin to the attic and made it her secret place. That attic mattered because it gave her something her daily life didn't: control. It was quiet, away from her father's eyes, away from the pressure of doing everything the right way. But it was also lonely. If she wanted to play, she had to accept being alone with her choice. Over time, that secrecy built a kind of self-trust. She learned that she could rely on herself, even when no one clapped for her, even when no one approved. Because she had to hide, she practiced in ways that were careful and extreme. She tucked the bow under old blankets to soften the sound. She learned how to hold back volume while still playing clearly. That kind of practice takes patience and focus. It also takes nerve because the risk was always there. One loud note, one creaky floorboard, and her father would know. And sometimes he did hear it. His anger rose each time the violin showed itself. Even for a moment, the punishments weren't just about the noise. To him, it was proof that she was not following his order. In that hidden space, she also discovered something rare. By around age 10, she could play difficult pieces just by listening to them. That points to strong musical hearing and what many people call perfect pitch. But in her case, it didn't come from fancy training or praise. It came from intense attention. When you're practicing in secret, you listen harder. You notice tiny changes in sound. You correct yourself again and again because no one else is guiding you. Her talent was being built in silence, with pressure pushing on every note. As she got older, that private skill didn't stay locked in the attic. By her early teen years, she started stepping into public spaces, and that's where music became a different kind of rebellion. At local folk fairs, she chose Beatles covers. In conservative communities, that kind of music could feel too bold, too modern, too free. But she played it anyway. People noticed. Teenagers gathered because they wanted something new, something that didn't sound like the old rules. She earned about 10 guilders per gig and hid the money so her mother wouldn't find it. That may sound small, but it was early independence. It was proof that her choices could create something real: income, confidence, and a growing sense of identity. She wasn't fighting authority with shouting or chaos. She was bending it with sound, drawing people in, making the room feel different, and realizing, maybe for the first time, what it felt like to be seen. And once she got a taste of that freedom, she didn't want to go back. Underground revolutions. By the time Marjorie was 16, playing music in quiet corners was no longer enough for her. She wanted space, people, and energy. So she created her own scene inside the one place that was supposed to be tightly controlled: her school. In the school basement, she began organizing Bohemian music nights that quickly became the center of attention for students who felt restless and unheard. These gatherings weren't random or reckless. They were carefully planned, even if they looked wild on the surface. Marjorie chose the music, spread the word quietly, and made sure the room felt safe for everyone who showed up. As the nights grew more popular, they also grew more visible. Complaints started coming in from people who didn't like what they heard or saw. One evening, everything came to a sudden stop. The police showed up and raided the basement. The reason given was immoral dancing, a phrase that spread quickly and caused shock among parents and teachers. What had started as music gatherings was now being treated as a moral problem. The school reacted fast and harshly. Marjorie was expelled for 3 months. The decision was meant to send a message and scare others into line. Instead, it turned her into a local topic of conversation. Newspapers picked up the story, framing it as a scandal. Her name appeared in print, tied to rebellion and disorder. For a teenager, that kind of attention could have been crushing. But for Marjorie, something unexpected happened. She didn't feel shame. She felt clarity. The punishment showed her that authority wasn't always right, and that fear was a tool used to keep people quiet. Being expelled didn't break her spirit. It confirmed something she already felt deep down. Music had power, and people were afraid of that power because it gathered others and changed behavior. Instead of stopping, she moved the concerts to friends' houses. The music continued, just in new places. The risk was still there, but fear no longer controlled her choices. She had crossed an internal line, and there was no going back. And that decision pushed her toward a much deeper turning point she didn't see coming yet: teaching and music. When Marjorie reached university age, she did what many people expected her to do. She studied German and took a path that looked safe and respectable. From the outside, it probably seemed like she was settling into a normal future. But inside, things didn't feel steady. University gave her structure, classes, and goals, yet she felt emotionally out of place. She could do the work, pass exams, and show up like she was supposed to, but it didn't match who she was becoming. She wasn't lazy or confused. She simply had a strong feeling that her real life was somewhere else. That mismatch became even clearer when she began teaching. She worked as a teacher at Dark College for about 7 years. Teaching is demanding, and it requires patience and routine. Marjorie could handle it, but she didn't feel fulfilled by it. Standing in front of a classroom was never the dream. It was the responsible option, and she tried to make it fit because it made life look stable. But at the same time, she was building a secret music life. On weekends and off hours, she slipped away to write and compose jingles for local radio stations. This wasn't a hobby. It was paid work, and she earned around 200 guilders a month. The problem was that moonlighting was not allowed, and she had to keep it hidden from her school principal. That secrecy mattered because it showed how carefully she was balancing 2 worlds. One world was rules, job security, and approval. The other world was music, risk, and real excitement. Eventually, she reached a point where the double life wasn't enough. At 21, she made the decision that many people avoid their whole lives. She quit teaching. She walked away from the steady paycheck and the social safety of a normal career. That choice wasn't dramatic for attention. It was practical in its own brave way. She knew that if she didn't commit fully, she would always be split in half. After leaving teaching, she joined Gemma Minon's Salon Orchestra as a violinist and arranger. The pay wasn't glamorous. Sometimes it wasn't even real pay. Sometimes it was sandwiches, small fees, or whatever the venue offered. But she gained something more important: real experience in the working music world. She learned how gigs actually happen, how people get booked, how musicians get paid, and how schedules and travel work. And once she stepped into that world for real, the next chapter brought rejection, risk, and a partnership that would change everything. Love under pressure. Marjorie's and Andre's relationship didn't begin in a soft, easy season of life. It formed while both of them were trying to build something that had no guarantee of working. They weren't just dating, they were creating a future together, and the pressure showed up early. One of the first big steps was their demo tape in 1973. They worked on it as a team. Andre focused on the sound, the musical direction, and the feeling he wanted listeners to get. Marjorie was involved in the creative side too, but she quickly became the person who pushed the project forward in a practical way. She understood something important. Good music alone doesn't travel. Someone has to carry it into the world, one door at a time. So when the demo tape was ready, she took charge of the business side. This wasn't a small task. She called 47 Dutch record labels. In that era, this meant standing at payphones, feeding in coins, and speaking to strangers who often didn't care or didn't have time. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't glamorous. It was repeated rejection in real time. 46 labels said no. Some didn't even listen closely. Some said the classical crossover style was too niche. Others probably didn't want to take a risk on unknown names. And Marjorie had to hear every no directly. She didn't hand it off. She didn't hide from it. She absorbed it. Then, one label finally agreed to give them a chance. It wasn't a grand victory with champagne and applause. It was a fragile yes, but that one yes was enough to keep the dream moving. Marjorie understood that success often begins as a small opening, not a wide door. Even with that small breakthrough, money was tight, very tight. And this is where the story turns from hard to extreme. At 22, Marjorie pawned her violin for 500 guilders to fund the first rehearsal of what would become the Maastricht Salon Orchestra. This wasn't just selling an object. For her, the violin was personal. It represented her childhood fights, her secret attic practice, her identity, and her future. Pawning it meant she was putting her most precious tool into someone else's hands, hoping she could earn it back. Around the same era, their personal life was also under pressure. 2 years before their international push really began, Marjorie and Andre secretly married on October 18, 1975. They kept it hidden because Andre's parents disapproved of her. They called her a hippie, which wasn't just a joke in that context. It was a label that meant wrong kind of woman, unstable influence, not acceptable for our son. His parents pushed him into 4 years of therapy, trying to change his choices and pull him away from her. That kind of family pressure can destroy couples. It can make people doubt themselves. It can turn love into exhaustion. But Marjorie didn't step away. She stayed beside him through it, even when she was the target. And Andre didn't abandon her to keep peace at home. They chose each other when approval vanished. That choice is one reason their partnership lasted, because it was tested early and survived. And once they were tied together in both love and work, the next phase got even bigger and a lot riskier. Building an orchestra. Building the orchestra didn't start in a big hall with sponsors and staff. It started at home, with regular furniture, late nights, and work that nobody in the audience would ever see. In the early years, Marjorie and Andre didn't have an office, a team, or a system that made things easy. They had a kitchen table, a small group of musicians, and a goal that felt bigger than their daily reality. One of Marjorie's most exhausting jobs was hand-copying sheet music. There were no neat digital files and quick printing the way people have them now. If musicians needed parts, someone had to create them. So she spent nights writing out music pages by hand, making set after set. The story says she copied around 200 sets for performances. That's not a quick task. It takes focus, accuracy, and patience. One wrong note can throw a musician off during a show. She wasn't just copying notes. She was making sure the orchestra could function at all. Rehearsals were also done in the most basic way possible. They practiced in their kitchen and living room. That meant chairs pushed aside, music stands squeezed into corners, and people trying to stay serious while standing in someone's home. It wasn't glamorous, but it created closeness. Everyone could see how hard the work was. Everyone could feel how much this mattered to Marjorie, because she was right there doing every detail. In 1982, they played at a local elderly home where only 8 people showed up. That alone is discouraging. But it got worse. All 8 walked out before the waltz even ended. Imagine standing there playing your heart out and watching the entire audience leave. For many people, that kind of moment would feel like proof that the dream is failing. Marjorie didn't treat it that way. She didn't collapse into embarrassment. She acted. She chased the audience members and spoke to them personally. She asked what went wrong and tried to fix it. She even promised free tea at future shows. That might sound small, but it shows how she thought. She believed people could be won back, not written off. She believed a bad night didn't define the future. Her persistence worked. Those same people came back, and they ended up booking return shows. She learned something powerful in a very painful way. Humiliation wasn't fatal. It didn't end the story. It was just another problem to solve. And soon, bigger problems than empty rooms were waiting for her. Protector mode. As the orchestra began to grow, the risks changed. The danger was no longer just empty rooms or unpaid gigs. Money started moving through the project, and with money came new problems. This was the moment when Marjorie stepped fully into what many people later described as her protector mode. She wasn't only building the dream anymore, she was guarding it. The warning signs appeared quietly. Small numbers didn't add up. Payments seemed late or smaller than expected. For some people, those details might have been easy to ignore, especially during busy touring periods. Marjorie didn't ignore them. She trusted her instincts and started checking the books herself. What she found was serious. Their accountant had stolen around 10,000 guilders from the orchestra. That amount may sound simple today, but at the time, it could have collapsed everything they were building. Instead of panicking, she acted fast. She stayed up all night going through financial records line by line. This wasn't her official job title, but she didn't wait for permission. She treated the situation like an emergency, because that's what it was. She tracked payments, matched receipts, and followed money trails until she understood exactly how the theft happened. This kind of work takes patience and clarity, especially when emotions are high. But she stayed focused because she knew the future of the orchestra depended on accuracy. Once she had proof, she didn't hesitate. She fired the accountant immediately and took legal action. That decision wasn't easy. Confronting betrayal never is, especially when the person involved was trusted. But Marjorie didn't soften the response to avoid discomfort. She understood that allowing dishonesty to linger would damage everything. Through legal steps, she managed to recover about 70% of the stolen money. That recovery didn't just save finances, it saved momentum and trust within the group. This moment changed how she operated from then on. Vigilance became her second instinct. She didn't assume goodwill would protect the project. She learned that growth attracts both opportunity and risk. From that point forward, she watched every number closely. She reviewed accounts herself, asked questions early, and made sure systems were clear. People inside the organization quickly learned that cutting corners or hiding information wouldn't work. This level of control wasn't about ego. It was about survival. She had seen how close they came to losing everything because of one dishonest person. Protecting the orchestra meant staying alert, even when things looked calm on the surface. And that sharp awareness would soon help her turn simple tools into powerful growth engines. Physical collapse. Touring pushed Marjorie to her physical limits, and one of the most intense moments came during a long run of concerts in Belgium in the early 1980s. The schedule was packed, travel was constant, and rest was limited. During sound checks, she started feeling dizzy and weak. Her breathing became harder, and her body felt heavy. These were clear warning signs, but she didn't stop. She kept performing, night after night, even as her condition worsened. By the time the final show ended, her body had nothing left to give. Doctors later confirmed she had pneumonia. They told her she had pushed herself far beyond what was safe. For many people, that kind of collapse would have been a breaking point. But for Marjorie, it became another turning moment. She recovered slowly, but once she was back on her feet, she didn't treat the experience as just suffering. She used it to her advantage. She went back to the promoter and renegotiated the terms of the tour. She secured double pay, making it clear that the work demanded more respect and better conditions. People around her were shocked by the move. Some thought it was too aggressive. Others quietly admired it. What mattered was the result. The negotiation changed how promoters viewed her and the orchestra. They now understood that pushing too hard came at a cost, and that Marjorie would not absorb that cost quietly. The story of her collapse and comeback spread quickly. It became one of those moments people repeated when talking about her strength. Over time, it grew into part of the orchestra's reputation. The myth wasn't about weakness, it was about endurance, limits, and control. Not long after that, she faced a different kind of resistance. This time, it wasn't physical, it was cultural. Marjorie believed deeply that waltzes still had a place in modern music. She felt they could be emotional, lively, and relevant if presented the right way. So she pitched a waltz revival to Dutch radio stations. She contacted 12 stations, and every single one rejected the idea. The response was blunt. They said people didn't want old waltzes anymore. They said the sound belonged in the past. Most people would have stopped there. Marjorie didn't. Instead of sending another letter or making another call, she walked directly into one of the radio stations without an invitation. She brought her violin and played live in the lobby while executives watched. It wasn't planned as a show, it was a direct statement. She wanted them to hear the music without filters, without excuses, and without time to dismiss it. Marjorie proved again that no wasn't a wall. It was a challenge waiting for a different approach. The night everything stopped. In 2010, everything they built almost stopped in a single night. André collapsed in Belgium at around 3 o'clock in the morning. This wasn't the kind of tiredness that goes away after sleep. It hit suddenly and violently. His world started spinning, and he couldn't stand or walk without falling. For someone whose career depends on being steady on stage, moving with confidence, and leading an orchestra, it was terrifying. In that moment, the problem wasn't just health. It was the fear that his entire future could disappear. Doctors later said it was a viral infection that attacked his vestibular nerve, the part of the inner ear that controls balance. This diagnosis made the situation even more frightening because recovery isn't immediate. Balance issues can take time, and there was no simple promise that he would be back to normal quickly. For about 3 months, he could barely walk. Tours stopped. Concerts were canceled. The orchestra froze because no one knew what came next. Thousands of fans were affected, and the business side of the organization suddenly faced a major crisis. Outside their private world, the media created noise. Some reports spread unclear or incorrect explanations, like travel fatigue or altitude issues. That kind of distortion can feel small to outsiders, but inside the situation, it adds pressure. When the public story is wrong, it's harder to protect the person at the center. It becomes harder to manage panic, rumors, and expectations. Privately, what they felt was not just worry. It was terrifying. André wasn't just sick. He was vulnerable in a way he had never been before. And Marjorie had to hold everything together while seeing him like that. And when the worst part finally passed, she prepared the next step with the same level of control. Stepping back without letting go. By the time Marjorie reached the later stage of her life, she had already spent decades running on high pressure. She wasn't only Andre's wife, she was also his manager, planner, problem solver, and the person who watched every detail. But eventually, even the strongest people have to make choices about what they can keep carrying. So in 2025, she began stepping back from public work. The key point is that she didn't disappear. She shifted the way she held control. She started handing most daily operations to their sons, Pierre and Marc. This wasn't done casually. From the story, it's clear she had been preparing them for years, letting them learn by doing and watching how the business really runs. By 2025, they were ready to lead key parts of the organization. Marc took control of tour logistics and artist management, while Pierre moved into bigger business decisions, including purchasing the historic Hotel d'Erlon in July 2025. These weren't small steps. They showed the family was turning the operation into a multi-part enterprise, not just a touring orchestra. In March 2024, Andre nearly collapsed again in Mexico City due to a severe flu, and several concerts had to be canceled. That scare hit differently because it reminded them that physical limits don't care about schedules or fame. After that incident, Marjorie drew a firm boundary: no altitude venues above 2,000 meters. She made it a permanent rule. This wasn't about being picky, it was about reducing risk. She had already lived through the 2010 collapse and knew how quickly everything could stop. This time, she didn't wait for another disaster to prove the point. So, by 2025, the family's castle home, des Torras, became more of a control center than a public stage. Marjorie watched from a quieter distance, stepping in when needed, guiding direction, and protecting the bigger plan without being at the front of it. That kind of shift can be emotionally complicated. When someone has been in charge for so long, stepping back can feel like losing part of their identity. But she did it in a way that still kept the structure strong. And then came the next major change: Andre's 2026 retirement plan. The public might see retirement as a sudden announcement, but for Marjorie, it likely wasn't sudden at all. She would have known before most people did, because she was always close to the real condition of the touring life: his energy, his recovery time, the strain of travel, and the risks behind the scenes. Planning retirement isn't just choosing a date. It means handling contracts, expectations, staff, branding, and the emotional reaction of fans. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes the people behind the scenes matter just as much as the ones in the spotlight.